Available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We are now transitioning from juggernaut to yet another juggernaut. This team is definitely going to be placed on the same level, same tier as Georgia. This could potentially be a preview of the CFP title game, Ohio State and Georgia. So talking about these two teams is definitely very exciting. But let's look at Ohio State now. Now, to get to this point, Ohio State had a lot of trials and tribulations. They certainly felt like at moments in time they had the personnel to go all the way. They had the depth and experience to go all the way. But the situation was the game. They could never get past the game against Michigan. But now, with one of the most exciting teams in recent memory that they've assembled, Ohio State is ready to take that step. And the only question that I really have about them is if they picked the right quarterback. So let's look into the tail of the tape. And let's start off with that quarterback. I'm very familiar with this young man as a fan of the Big 12, as a fan of Texas, a former Kansas State QB, Will Howard. When I think about Will Howard, he certainly is someone who has a lot of good traits to him. He's built well, he's very anticipatory, he understands the game of football at a high level, and when I think about Kansas State teams in the past, these are teams that really elevated the talent, and Will Howard was a huge reason for that. However, in the profile of an Ohio State, is he really the guy to over-exceed all the expectations of what Ohio State was in the past? Is he the guy to get them over the hump? He certainly feels like he has the wide receivers and weapons to do just that. We start off with Emeka Egbuka, the number one returner from this wide receiver class, perhaps the best route runner we've seen in college football in recent memory. He certainly has the feel of a wide receiver one. He's been ready for quite some time, just had to sit behind some excellent wide receivers from Ohio State, like Jackson Smith and Jigba. And now he has the chance to really profile as the guy who has often been overlooked, but now has the opportunity to shine. And he just has to hope that Will Howard presents him with that opportunity. Then we look at perhaps the most talked about freshman from spring practices in recent memory, Jeremiah Smith, turning heads. Hasn't even played a single snap of college football. And yet, the way that Ohio State talks about him, he seems like the second coming of Christ. A lot of expectations are going to be placed on his shoulders as kind of the guy who really comes into his own this year. He doesn't necessarily have to be that dominant, but I feel as if they really want him to shine in a heightened role immediately right away because they're talking about him very highly. Then we look to another guy in sophomore receiver Carnell Tate, who also hasn't had a chance to shine. And when we think about how this whole wide receiver room is set up for Will Howard, you have the guy that you need in terms of experience when you're bringing in a transfer QB who's been in the system, who can help him adjust to the system, and you have the exciting guys. You have the eye-popping guys who are really looking to get going in their college careers in Smith and Tate, and I think that they will really focus on allowing Will Howard to just be loose and be free and have what it takes to be the Ohio State QB, because right now it might not take that much to really be the Ohio State QB. Then we switch to the defense. The Ohio State defense is always come into question for kind of underperforming and underwhelming in big situations, but they certainly have one of the most experienced groups in the country, especially at the linebacker position. And it starts with JT Tuimoloau. This guy can play a lot of different roles I love him. He's a nice little hybrid player. He can pass rush. He can be in coverage. He can move sideline to sideline. When I look at this linebacker core, it's one of the strongest in the country. You have not just him. You have Jack Sawyer, Tommy Eichenberg. Shout out Cody Simon, one of my classmates at St. Peter's Prep. So shout out to him. He's going to finally have a big role in that linebacker room. When I think about this Ohio State defense, a lot of people might be underestimating it just because of the fact that they haven't gotten over the hump against a team like Michigan. But let's just look at the stats. They have, like Georgia, top 10 depth in all the positions for PFF. I think that if Will Howard is serviceable enough, this team can win. Over the past 2 seasons, he had a 73.4 PFF grade. That's certainly not the best, but it's only something to work with. Let's think about last year for Ohio State and where it kind of all went wrong a little bit. You had a very similar player to Will Howard in Kyle McCord, who was very just focused on getting the ball to his biggest weapon, getting the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. And so, will Will Howard have the confidence to do that as well? Will he have the ability to do that well? And so, I really believe that right now, for Ohio State, as I'm going to look at their schedule right now, it's all going to be about the offensive side of the ball, because I'm not as worried in the defense as I've been in the past. I'm not as worried. I think they have a solid linebacker core, very versatile linebacker core, and I think that ultimately they will be the kind of bar setter for this team. When I look at the schedule, I see a couple games where they might slip up. I'm looking at week 6, where they're away to Oregon. They're away to the great Dylan Gabriel. They're away to a very solid team. It's also going to be in the Big Ten, if not the CFP discussion. Then they have another away game in 2 weeks after that at Penn State. Beaver Stadium, we don't have to talk about that stadium. Should they get past those 2 tests comfortably, and Will Howard is comfortable doing it, then I have very high hopes for Ohio State. Because you wait until the end of the season to play Michigan. And that game is at home. So, on your schedule, Ohio State fans, you only have 2 games before the game where you're going to be tested. They're both away games. One of the stadiums being perhaps the hardest place to play if you're a Big Ten team on the road ever. And if you can get past that, you're home free. Because I'm looking at, say, an 11-1 Ohio State team going into the game. And I'm looking at a 12-team playoff. While it certainly would be disappointing should they lose the game, because that's the game they circle every year on the calendar, you don't necessarily have to put as much emphasis into that game if you're, say, a one-loss team entering it. If I'm Ohio State, I'm kind of pushing all my cards into the previous games, because if I rack up the wins then, and say I lose to Michigan, it's always going to hurt losing to Michigan. You're still probably going to be the number 1 team out of the Big Ten in the CFP discussions. And it really also helps as the Big Ten becomes divisionless, because you're not having to worry about comparing your kind of thing with Michigan. And so, looking at those 2 road games, worry about them. Worry about Oregon and Penn State. Worry about another transfer QB in a similar position to your Will Howard, and overcoming the atmosphere of Penn State. If you do that, then you're in fantastic position to be number 1 in the rankings, regardless of what Georgia does. That's the thing that I feel like Ohio State needs to pinpoint. I didn't even mention their win projections. They're 9.7 win projection totals. And they're 4th in PFF power rankings. I didn't even talk about the other addition they made at the running back position in Quinshon Judkins. So this really has the opportunity to be an offensive juggernaut, one of the best teams in this new look era to start off this 12-team CFP. That's the thing that I feel like Ohio State teams of the past have had trouble with. Staying true to their identity. They kind of lost themselves as seasons have gone on, and that's why they haven't really gotten over the hump in the game of late. That's why Michigan has taken control. You can say it's Jim Harbaugh, but a lot of it is on Ohio State as well. Why has a team that's had the talent and depth to beat Michigan, and soundly for that matter, not over the past 3 years? Now it certainly feels like the time for Ohio State to take advantage. But first, take care of business in those 2 road tests. Then you can worry about the game. If you take it one step at a time, then you can place emphasis on that. That's just about do it for this segment. Coming up to finish off our show, we have perhaps the only major independent in contention for the CFB title. Another team kind of like Washington, who could be a sneaky dark horse. We'll have to see about them after the break.